It just, the relief and the opening. I use the word liberating sometimes.
Absolutely.
It's like it just opens up so many more choices.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of, I can't do this because I can't earn enough, or I can't do this because I can't. And when those things are figured out, it means you can make choices. If what you really want to do is X or Y, you've got the system in place that's going to now say, go do that.
Welcome to the Money Skills for Therapists podcast, where we answer this question: how can therapists and health practitioners go from money shame and confusion to feeling calm and confident about their finances and get money really working for them in both their private practice and their lives? I'm your host, Linzy Bonham, therapist turned money coach and creator of the course Money Skills for Therapists. Hello, and welcome to season 9 of the Money Skills for Therapists podcast. I'm very excited about today's episode because I feel like in a way today's episode is bringing an aspect of the business of money nuts and bolts forward to share with our podcast. I'm having a conversation with our coach from Money Skills for Therapists, Diane Webber. So Diane is a therapist based in Pennsylvania. She specializes in financial therapy, supporting women going through transitions. She's a graduate of Money Skills for Therapists. She's a graduate of the Money Boss Mastermind, which was a small mastermind I did a couple of years ago. And now, since last year, she is the coach inside of Money Skills for Therapists. So in that course, Diane and I each do some calls, and together we coach students and help them through building their skills and changing their relationship with money. And so I'm really excited to bring her onto the podcast today, both to introduce you to her, but also to give you all a taste of the conversations that we also have behind the scenes. Like, what is it like to help people inside Money Skills for Therapists? So in my conversation with Diane today, we talk about her changing relationship with money through different chapters of her life, right? Through a first marriage and pregnancy and solo parenting and a second marriage, the loss of her father. We also talk about money in relationships in general, what she sees in her clinical work, how a relationship with money can also change through being in a partnership. And we talk about our shared experiences with coaching inside of Money Skills for Therapists, what it's like to work with therapists, what it's like to support therapists with talking about something that is very stigmatized and vulnerable and difficult to talk about, which is money. Diane made some great connections between money and sex and food in terms of the charge and stigma around all these things. Very excited to share this conversation with you. Here is my conversation with Diane Webber. So Diane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here today.
I'm very excited to have you here. Diane, you are the coach in Money Skills for Therapists right now. I talk about having a coaching team, and Christelle does some like support of students, but really it's you and me. We are the coaching team in Money Skills for Therapists.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to have you on today so that, you know, we can talk about you and like your experience with money, what you've learned about money as a therapist in private practice and coming from all sorts of interesting professional backgrounds that you do too. So before we dig in a little bit more to your story, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Diane Webber, and I have a small private practice in northeastern Pennsylvania. For anyone who watches The Office on TV, I'm just north of Scranton, and we carry that with pride here. I opened a private practice in July of 2018, and before that, I spent 16 years working in one of our local universities. 11 of those years, I supported college students with disabilities and provided accommodations and accessibility, any kind of services and supports that they needed. Prior to that, I worked in corporate America in the Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. area. So I have kind of a colored work background, but in a lot of fun and different ways. And what I have truly found is that each of those kind of milestones or steps along the way has informed the next one. And when COVID happened in 2020, I switched to a fully online telehealth platform, and I never went back. I work from home most of the time, and I meet a lot of dogs, a lot of cats. I see jammies and robes, as well as it's a very interesting shift to move a private practice into a telehealth platform, but I really enjoy it. Yeah, and it really works well with my life these days, so I'm happy about that.
The telehealth thing is interesting. It's just making me think like I didn't do a ton of online work like after COVID? Because after COVID, I only saw like kind of a small handful of clinical clients before I finally just went, 100% into Money Skills for Therapists. But it does make me think about, I remember one session I did with a client where he held the phone at this really kind of like funny, weird angle as he was like, doing his EMDR. And I'm like kind of like looking up his nose. And it's like, this is different than it would have been in person. There's something kind of like very intimate about being in somebody's home, as you say, like with pets and robes. And it has brought a different aspect to therapy work.
Yes, very much so. You actually really get to see a different aspect of people too. You see their lives beyond what they present when they bring it to your office. So
absolutely.
It's been really interesting.
Yeah, there's a Yalom, or Irvin Yalom, the therapy writer. I remember reading a book by him where he says, if you have not met like your client's partner or family member, like if you haven't done a family session or you haven't seen their home, like you need to do it, because you get this completely different perspective, as you're saying, Diane, of what that person's life actually looks like. We all have our own ways of talking about our life and telling our story. But for a therapist to actually see somebody's home or sit with them, with somebody they're in relationship with, is a totally different perspective on the folks that we're supporting.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I also tend to use a lot of very everyday metaphors and analogies in the work that I do. I think it's just the way my brain works. I'm all the time going, that's like this and that's like that. But when we're trying to make sense of thoughts and feelings and anxieties and decision making, it's hard to wrap our heads around it. And so being able to use everyday analogies, it brings it way down to a much more relatable level for people. So I often will use things I see on screen and not to mention stories that, I bring back stories and make connections with things. And I actually have a lot of fun with that too. It's kind of a fun aspect of the work.
Yes, certainly. So in terms of your entry into the role, we were chatting a little bit off mic before we started recording about your journey into actually becoming the coach of Money Skills for Therapists. And I feel like it encapsulates a lot of stuff that we tend to talk about in our community and on this podcast. So can you tell your experience of actually applying to become the coach for Money Skills for Therapists? What did that look like for you?
Sure. Absolutely. If I can back up just a little bit, I was maybe my second year into private practice and, eager to grab all kinds of learning and resources. And some of the things I was collecting talked about it was important to have a niche. And when I first opened my practice, I had a long history of working with individuals with disabilities. And so I did pick up some of that aspect, but I realized I didn't want to keep doing that. I wanted to shift. And a lot of the specialties that my colleagues were doing, honestly, I wasn't interested in. I was like, nah, I don't know. What's me? And what I found was that the common thread across so many of my clients, the ones that I was excited to work with when I said, ooh, they're coming, was there was some kind of transition that they were trying to make, and money was a key component. So whether they wanted to leave a relationship that was unhealthy and they didn't think they could afford it, or they wanted to change careers, but they didn't think they could manage that financially, or they had a loss and now they were in charge of the finances and didn't know how to manage any of that. There was this money piece that I found really interesting and also not commonly talked about. And I was in a workshop and I said, I don't know what this is, but this is what I want to do more of. And one of the colleagues said, you might like financial social work. You might like financial therapy. And I said, that's a thing? And she said, yeah, that's a thing. And started to give me some resources, which then led me down a rabbit hole to some different podcasters and eventually to you as well. And it was in one of your podcasts that I learned about Money Skills for Therapists. And it was at the end of 2021. And I remember signing up, and I took the program in January, February, March of 2022. And I just loved it. I love that detail. And that for those who can see, I'm just curling my fingers because I like getting into some detail sometimes. And this was a kind of fun and safe place for me to do that. And I really enjoyed that course and immediately implemented a lot of what I learned both in my private practice and in my life. And then a few months later, you offered the Money Boss small group coaching, which I signed up for. During that time, my father also passed away very suddenly. And my father was, he was an accounting and finance person in his career, and money was always a topic of conversation in our household. So as soon as I started working after college, I had a retirement account set up. Talking about money was a common thing in our household. And it was, whenever you do an exercise where someone says money is, my immediate response is like this precious treasure, and which has its pros and cons.
Yes.
Because I do very much regard it positively, and I see it as something very important, but I also can hold it too tightly sometimes.
Yes.
And so that's been a great, growth experience.
Yeah. When I see that gesture from you, like the hands, and folks who are watching on YouTube will see this, but the shadow side, I think of that is, it reminds me of Gollum.
Yes, yes, exactly.
It's
you're like,
you're
oh,
precious,
my precious. Yeah.
Yeah, there can be a clutching or clinging to that reverence.
Yes. And that can get in the way very much. So just to kind of backpedal, through the Money Boss small group coaching program, that kind of, it inspired me to do a workshop with our local college community about financial therapy, about financial anxiety, and how that may be an important topic for students. Personally, I have a 17-year-old, so thinking about his relationship with money as he gets ready for college, my past history with college students, I thought this could be a really interesting topic and a fun way to practice speaking about it. And it was really well received from that. One of the local universities asked me to come and do more workshops about it. And the topic was really about our relationships with money and why they're important. Just like we have a relationship with food, we have a relationship with our loved ones, we have a relationship with ourselves and our bodies, we also have a relationship with money. And it's not often talked about, or talked about comfortably, and it's important. So that was a really neat experience that started to bolster my confidence in that area. And I just kept kind of coming back to this piece of, I really enjoy that education component, and I like the community component that private practice, and especially a telehealth private practice, lacks.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, if you want this, you have to go out and find it. You have to create it. You have to get it, because your job isn't giving it to you right now. And that's okay. You just find it somewhere else. And it was June of 2023, and you posted an announcement that you were hiring a new coach. My family and I were getting ready to go on vacation. We had saved up to go on a trip to Italy, and my mom had decided to go with us as a really neat thing to kind of feel connected to our family, despite my dad's passing. And when I submitted the application, it was really fun. And I had a lot of pride in being able to say, as I write this, I'm about to go on vacation. And through this course, I have money set aside for vacation. I have money set aside for my operating expenses. I can lighten my workload for the next 2 weeks while I travel. And so this is that work in action. And that was really fun to be able to just, crank it out, which is not my style. I am a very methodical person. And I was like, if you want this, you're going to focus on it over the next 3 days and get it submitted.
Gotta do
it. Which was also fun and a bit of a stretch for me as well. But as we see, it worked out. And I'm just loving the work and loving watching the transformations happen as people join the course and work through it. And the lessons that they learn and feel comfortable sharing at the end are really fun. I'm sad when some of the folks graduate. I'm sad.
Too.
I'm like, I'm going to miss them.
Yes. The course used to be cohorted, right? So it used to be that there was like a group that would move through together, and it was much shorter, right? So now the container right now for Money Skills for Therapists, for folks listening, is a 6-month container, right? So it's kind of like folks have lots of time to access as much support as they need. And like Diane and I really get to know people in that time, because if folks decide to show up a bunch, like if you show up to every call, you're going to see Diane and I each 12 times. Right. And so it's like we really build those relationships. But before, when I first built the course, it was only 6 weeks long, not 6 months. And so it would be this very intense, like getting to know everybody over 6 weeks and then having to say goodbye to everybody all at once. And one of my decisions that I made when I really leaned into this business is I was like, I can't actually do that emotionally. I can't be saying goodbye to a group of people all at once every, 3 months to have to say goodbye to a group of people that I've gotten attached to. Like the emotional kind of, of that was so much, because yeah, we do really get to know students.
Mhm.
And this is what I say to folks. If you show up, like, we will know you. We will support you. We will love you, because we do really get to see folks progress and grow and understand what makes folks tick over our 6 months together.
And there is often life that happens in 6 months.
There is.
And that is also what happens in our businesses.
Yeah.
So we're constantly adjusting and recalibrating. And so for us to be able to experience that with them and help present options can also be really useful.
Yes.
Again, like for now and well into their futures.
Absolutely. As you were telling your story of, going through Money Skills and then going through Money Boss and stepping up to basically like putting yourself out there, right, in your own community and starting to do this financial education. I mean, I remember supporting you through that process and the other amazing therapists in that group supporting you through that process. And something that I remember noticing towards the end of Money Boss, which I would say is still very much alive now, is like you've developed so much more of a sparkle. Like, you sparkle so much more. Right? Because I think that you and I similarly, I think are people who tend towards like kind of safety, and we can be probably overly safe of weighing out, does this make sense? Right. And more on the probably staying small side of things rather than Absolutely. That's something that I've seen in you over the last couple of years that we've known each other is like you have really, and for you, it is sparkle. I don't know how else to say it.
Thank you.
You sparkle so much more in the work that you've done and in putting yourself out there and realizing, oh, people want to hear more of this. Like they're asking me for more in your community. And then like through coaching in like Money Skills, you're just so much more yourself. I think so much more open than you were a couple of years ago when we first started working together.
Yes.
Like I can see that work that you have been doing on that aspect of your life.
Yeah. And thank you. First of all, I really appreciate that. And I'll say it doesn't come without being terrified.
Yes.
Like I remember my first coaching call, I had a very detailed outline of what I was going to do. And I had a PowerPoint and, I was like, ugh. And then I realized everyone in the room is human and they were so enthusiastic and excited. And yesterday's coaching call, we did takeaways at the end, and it was really powerful to hear each of the students say what they were taking away. And I was like, wow,
I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Christelle and I joked about it not long ago. I said, I'm starting to use more GIFs. I'm getting a little pizzazz in the Mighty Networks. And it's like, it's in there. It's in there, but I am a very methodical person. I tend to be more on the reserve side. I was born in 1975. So I grew up very much in the 80s and 90s when the societal pressures were stay small, no fat, low fat, be tiny, and I'm a petite person also. And so it was like every message I got was just be very, very, under the radar and don't make a lot of waves. And so it's been interesting to really think about if you're in a service profession in your own business, it's important to be seen and heard, and people can't know about you unless they know about you.
Yes.
And that's been a real kind of back and forth interplay, or I don't want to say struggle, but it's been a real interesting conversation in my own head about, oh no. And then, people don't know you're out there unless they know you're out there.
Yeah.
And that's an important message for all of our students as well.
Absolutely.
In the work that they're doing.
Yeah. And this is, what I see in the therapists that we support is like, folks are so talented and they're so capable.
Yes.
And they're so brilliant in whatever niche they've carved out for themselves. Like they know so much about the thing that they know. Whether that is like mental health or folks who are, SLPs or OTs, like they just have such brilliance. But when you keep your brilliance privately in your own little home office and then, wonder why folks aren't finding you, they're probably not going to wander through your house. Yeah.
Yeah. Be like, where is this person?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that, for me too, like being in the online space and being like the face of Money Skills for Therapists and like trying to get folks in the door to like work with us so we can help them, with all these pieces that we support them with. There is this phrase, which is like selling is helping. And it can feel super uncomfortable to sell and be like, I've got this thing. This is what the thing does. This is the results we see. I'm not making this up. And the things that you and I see in the program every day, it can feel extremely uncomfortable. And sometimes people get, they're not happy that you're selling. They try to tell you to like be quieter. But if we don't let ourselves be seen, if we don't help people understand this is how I can actually help you, then we can't actually help them. they're not getting the full support that we've already created a container to do. And so that's true of therapists and like the therapy work that they do, but it's also true of courses and the kind of work that we're doing. Like you need to kind of toot your own horn and be like, this is really great. I'm over here. Otherwise, nobody knows what you're doing and they're not going to get the benefit of what you do.
Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah. I think it's worth pointing out too that especially for those in the United States, this most recent, there was a cybersecurity breach. And to just point out that even those of us who've had a lot of experience and would like to think our money skills are fine-tuned or fine-tuning, still experience fear, still, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? How's this going to work? And, myself included, my practice is 100% insurance reimbursed. Yeah. And the EHR system that I use for my records management uses Change Healthcare significantly. And so there's been a huge delay in any kind of reimbursements coming in. And for me, even though I'm in this all the time, every day, to go, oh my gosh, what is this going to mean? And then to be able to kind of pause and say, okay, you have your systems, you know what you do. You just go back to those basics and look at what you have and you can move things. That's what it's for, And so I try to be very real throughout as a human and someone experiencing all kinds of things, as well as someone who has done the work and seen the results, because that's also really important, that there is no arriving. There is no, we keep reviewing, revisiting as our businesses change, as life circumstances like this that are completely out of our control happen. To be able to kind of pause and regroup is an important thing also.
It is. And, it makes me think about a podcast that I recorded recently with Jeanette Dove, who's one of our grads. I did a coaching episode with her and she used this phrase of lifes. Right? Like life,
yes.
Like
here it comes.
You have your best plans in your cars. Oh, I'm actually going to die. So figure that out. Right. And so that's the only thing that we can anticipate is that unexpected things are going to come up. Right. So how do we build systems to help us navigate that without the opposite of what you and I are talking about in the place that you and I have both come from, which is like making yourself too small or like trying to control everything about life. Like how do you make systems that are robust and that will take care of you, but also give you the flexibility to live and still be present and enjoy life. It's not about building up your $100,000 emergency fund, which we can do, and those of us with more like hoarding kind of tendencies can do. But it's the robustness of having a buffer here and a buffer there and a bit of savings here, and those things make a really big difference when things like the Change Healthcare cyber attack happens. Right?
Yeah.
And like right now, I'm sure the folks who have the buffers are feeling that security and safety much more than the folks who haven't, because we're also reliant on these big systems that we can't control.
Right. Yeah. And to be able to look at accounts and say, okay, I think I could float for about a month. I think I could float for about 6 weeks is nice and concrete.
Yes. It is.
As opposed to what am I going to do? How are we going to do this? Yes. Well, let's see. We've got 6 weeks. If we get to 4 and we're still not there, then we look at, do I pick up a part-time job? Do we get a loan from the bank? But to have those concrete pieces of information reduces the fear quite a bit.
The clarity, right? It's the clarity that we're all about.
Yes. And to circle back to the preciousness, it's that idea. I'd look at my operating expenses account and say, see, you have a buffer in there. And I'd be like, but that's and that's what it's for.
Yes.
It'll sink, it'll shrink, and then you'll rebuild it. And that's fine. And so this is your opportunity to actually see it in action.
Yes. To use it for what it's there for.
Yeah.
Which is moments like this. So, I mean, speaking of this idea of kind of lifing, and things happening to you, one of the things that I so appreciate about you, Diane, and you've already talked about some of your professional experience, which gives you this kind of diversity of experiences that you bring to your coaching. But also, you're someone who has experienced like some distinct chapters of life that I think give you like a maturity and wisdom around money, having gone through certain things. So I'm curious.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what have you learned about money? How has your money relationship changed through some of the different chapters of your life? Off mic, you mentioned like divorce and remarrying, and you mentioned in this recording like your father passing away unexpectedly. What have those things taught you about money?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. And I like using the word interesting because I tend to be an emotional person. And so I can get very tearful very quickly. And so when I use words like curious and interesting, it keeps me in a different space. Not that I'm not uncomfortable being emotional, because I absolutely am. Very early on, I knew I wanted to be a working mom, and I graduated from college during the dot-com startup phase. That was huge. So we had all these little college graduates going into corporate jobs in our little suits and our little bonuses and now that I think of it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was so young. And so I worked in management consulting and government contract work in the Washington, D.C. area. And I saw a lot of working moms there and I knew that was important to me, but I did not like what I saw, And so I thought, I want to be a working mom, but not that kind. And that was a really powerful observation for me to kind of hold, and which then made me think, okay, so then this isn't it for me for ever. I need to find something else. And my mom worked in a college library her whole career. So she kept pushing, you might want to work in a school or work in a university where your schedule is a little more family friendly and it's a fun environment, and so on and so forth. I ended up getting married in DC, and my now ex-husband was from the Pennsylvania area, which is how we ended up back here. And we were trying to decide, do I go to grad school? Does he find a different job, or do we move closer to family? And what we decided on was that we would move closer to family, and I would go to grad school and he would find a job in this area, which is what led me into going to get my master's locally here. I loved the counseling program. I did not want to be a therapist, but I loved the counseling program. I wanted to work in higher education and researched all the different paths that I could get to. So one thing that was really interesting is when I went to grad school, I was not working. I had a graduate assistantship, but I wasn't working. And I really did not like not bringing in very much income. It felt very uncomfortable for me. I have a vivid memory of standing in front of a vending machine and debating over $1.50 for a candy bar, because I was like, I didn't earn this. I don't feel like I could spend. And so that idea of kind of having my own source of income is really important and has been throughout. Got my master's, ended up getting a job at the university where I got my master's, and then and I got pregnant with my son, and unfortunately our marriage did not survive. Fortunately, we're very close still. We do a great job raising our son together, but so I was on my own still pregnant actually, and that was really, really challenging. So that idea of I need to be able to support myself, and I can, part of it was I know I can. Mm-hmm. And so I will. And kind of figuring those things out forced me to grow up really quickly in a way. And my family was 3 hours away and my brother's out in Chicago. So I was, pretty much on my own and trying to kind of figure things out with the local community, which I did. And I have an amazing son, and met my second husband as he was a teacher at the university. And it's really interesting. His relationship with money is very different. We both do not like debt, which is the same. I very much like to save, and he supports that, but he's an artist and an art teacher. And one of the things that very much stands out for me when we first started dating was that he said, I earn enough money to pay for a trip to Italy, and then I go. Mm-hmm. And then I earn more money to pay for a trip, and then I go. And I was like, wow, because I was raised to save, watch it grow, And I was like, but that makes so much sense. Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense. So we do balance each other in very nice ways in that regard, because I have a tendency to hold it precious. He has a tendency to say, like, why?
Yeah.
We want life experiences. And so we have a son together. And so we have really made it a goal to have really neat experiences with our kids. And we are very open to say we are saving for this trip, and then we're going to go. And in between, we do inexpensive camping trips or things like that, because it's important I feel it's important to be more transparent about money and its purpose and its use, and that it's important to work for what you want. And then you go, and then you celebrate, and then you do it again, and then you do it again.
That's interesting. So your husband really has had quite an impact, it sounds, on your relationship to money. It's changed a lot through that marriage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It has. And in both marriages, I was the keeper of the checkbook. I was the keeper of things. And in both cases, my spouses were very fine with that, which was nice. We did not have conflict about money in either marriage. I never felt that was an issue. And I have several friends and a lot of clients who experience that a lot. And so I find that really interesting. And it's one of the things I really like to explore. One of the ways I got more interested in financial therapy was the idea around control of money, literacy, awareness, knowledge, and also different comfort levels around debt and financing things. And I just find that fascinating. I'm like, wow. In a way that I don't get tired of. There are other things where I might get a little tired, and this one I'm like, say more.
It's so true, though. I think that compatibility, I guess it's compatibility. I'm sure there's other aspects to it too, but just being able to be on, I love that you're drinking from your Money Boss mug. I just need to say, she's got her Money Boss mug from the Money Boss.
I love it.
Mine broke recently, which was so sad. The handle just fell right off. That compatibility with a partner of being able to come onto enough of a same page about money that it's not a conflict in your relationship or marriage is a big deal. It's a big deal because, I certainly know couples that do not agree about how money should be managed and don't agree about what's valuable and what's not. Or couples that even though they're married, manage their money very separately. So it's like one is broke and one has a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's a huge stressor in a relationship when you can't get on page about money. Because everything is money. As a couple, your project is to build a life together.
I fully agree. Yeah. And I find it really interesting. I have some clients that have some debt that they have not shared with their spouse.
Wow. Yeah.
And I find that really interesting.
That is interesting.
And try, to gently explore, but respect their reasoning.
Sure.
And I'm like, okay, interesting. And vice versa, clients whose spouses don't allow them access to their finances. And I think, how can they not allow you? Your name's on the account. How can you be limited? And, but even having trouble at banks trying to get access to statements or things like that. It's been, and then the whole piece of, I just don't want to talk about it.
Yes.
I don't want to, one of my very dear colleagues, I personally am very modest. I don't like talking about sex, and I said, I realized one day to others who don't like talking about money, it's if I were to have a very frank conversation about sex, I'd be like, or about food. Like those are areas that can be very complicated. And I was like, interesting. Again, interesting.
Yeah.
There's a lot of parallels, in those three areas of how much do you talk about? How much is not enough? How much is too much? And so that also has allowed me to be much more compassionate and also curious and careful in terms of any of the conversations that happen, whether it's with clients or in Money Skills.
Yeah, that's an interesting parallel, money and sex. I've never thought about that before, but I'm definitely the person who will be like hanging out with friends and I'm like, yeah, well, how much do you make a year?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And when I do it, I know that I'm breaking the rules. I know I'm not supposed to do that. And of course, I will gladly tell them everything about like our own financial picture. But I'm thinking about one couple that Rodrigo, my partner, and I were friends with for a little while. They moved out of town, unfortunately. They were a very cool couple. But I remember, having a conversation with them and they were like, yeah. And then our accountant got us like a big tax refund. And I was like, oh, like 5,000 big, 10,000 big. I'm like, what are we talking about? What does this even mean? But yeah, you are like breaking the rules. And something I've noticed about myself, speaking to about what I was reflecting to you about seeing you like sparkle so much more. In myself too, like I've noticed myself sparkling a lot more in the last few years. And part of the question I have to ask myself now is, am I obnoxious? Am I not reading the room? Because it's like, I'm just so excited to talk about these things. But yeah, I'm sure so many folks do maybe experience the exact same way as somebody who starts talking about, sex in a very detailed, personal way at like a dinner party. And you're like,
yeah.
I don't really want to talk to you about this. I don't even know you. That's a really interesting parallel in terms of intimacy, like the level of intimacy and vulnerability that comes with money, because we're so used to it. But I've definitely met, sex educators who just will talk about anything. And I also am not someone who talks a ton about sex with people that I don't know. So I would probably feel a similar level of discomfort to what lots of folks feel about trying to, talk to them about money. in a really frank way. You got to kind of read the room,
Yes.
with where folks are at. And I do notice, like, with money skills for therapists, like, I've had moments like this on calls, and I wonder if you have too, where, like, I will say to somebody, like, if you're up for sharing your numbers, it would be really helpful. And I sometimes, like, folks share no problem. They're like, yeah. Here's my, like, YNAB, or here's my QuickBooks or my bank. And it's so educational for everybody else who's there. Like, it is this shame reducer for everybody in the space to see somebody else's real numbers, whatever it means, whether they're bigger or smaller or different or, like, totally different system. Like, it's just so demystifying. And that's one of our values as a company, is to have transparency around money and facilitate those types of open conversations. But also, I've had students before who were like, I want to share, but I think I'm going to barf. But I want to share. Yes. I think I'm going to barf. Yes. Like, it can be really, really activating to share that. Like, it's kind of like taking your clothes off, but then when you do it, you're like, oh, it's not so bad. Like, whenever I've gone to, like a women's spa and everybody's naked, at first it's okay, I can do this. And then it's like,
right.
We all have buddies. We all have buddies. We all have money. We all have bank accounts. It's kind of like all the same thing at the end of the day. But it definitely can be a very, very charged, lots of defenses and responses that come up for us around these types of topics.
And I have pretty recent experiences of it myself. When we were doing some initial training on YNAB, and you were helping me get some things set up, I vividly remember you said, can you open your account? And I was like, no. And you're like, yeah. And I did. And then it was open for a while. And I was, we need to shut this down. Someone's going to get at it. And you were like, I think you'll be okay. You're sitting at the computer.
Yeah.
And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, you get in, you get out. Like, you don't.
Oh, interesting.
You don't, like, because someone could hack your computer and get it. And so to have it, like, there and have it there for a long time was really interesting.
Yes.
And, so I get it. I get it totally. from living it. An example I often use in more of my clinical work, which is also similar, I have a lot of clients that are debating medication, and they're very nervous to have that conversation with their doctor. And I normalize it. We talk about all the pros and cons and what they're comfortable with and things like that. And then I often normalize it by saying, so for example, if you had a rash, you'd go to the dermatologist, and nobody likes to talk about a rash. But they look at it and they're like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is. And here you go, and so in very similar domains. And it's another example of how, like, everyday analogies can kind of bring it to, oh yeah, I see how that, it's really not that big a deal.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yeah.
It just brings everything down so that it is not nearly so intimidating or scary. And it kind of puts all of us on a much more human level.
It does. And I think by doing that, we can address something that otherwise will just be a problem forever.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's interesting you make that analogy with medication, because I personally started on antidepressants for the first time, like, last year. Like, I just turned 40. So I was 39 years old. I tried medications for the very first time, done lots of therapy, obviously. But I finally kind of had that conversation with my doctor of, I think maybe it's time. I had some other stuff come up, some PMDD come up, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It's not fun for folks who are listening. No. And the treatment for that is antidepressants. And so I was like, sure, I'll try antidepressants. I've always been kind of curious. And I will say that it has changed everything about my life. My life has become infinitely easier, right? But it was getting to that point of having the conversation and things getting bad enough to ask for help. And now what I'm having to process is the grief that I didn't do this 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And this is what I see with our students around money, right? I just had that come up the other day on a Money Skills for Group Practice Owners call, where somebody was talking about how just, like, shit, like, for so many years I haven't been looking at this, and for so many years, like, it hasn't been working, and, like, the pain of that. And then when you finally start to get it working and you're like, oh, I could have done this so long ago. There is a grief that comes up there because it's hard and it's scary. But once you address it, you've changed something fundamental about your life. So it's worth the work, but it's hard to get there. And it takes many of us many years to deal with all sorts of things.
All sorts. Yep. And I always say you weren't ready then, and you're ready now.
True.
Right.
So true. So true. So Diane, coming towards the end of our conversation today, I'm curious, for you, working with students who are therapists, health practitioners, in Money Skills for Therapists, I'm going to ask you, like, what is your favorite part about supporting therapists with money?
That is a great question. My instant response is that I genuinely get excited when they have a success. Like I'm like, yes. Like when there's that aha, and especially if they've been working at it, and they're like, I got it. That is so much fun because I know that feeling of relief and accomplishment when you do something that you have found to be so hard and then it works, and the ease that comes after it is, I just get so excited about that.
Yeah. And you know, it's so funny. I don't know if it's just because it tracks, but I feel the exact same way in terms of excitement. And this is something that I've written before about in, promotional emails, selling the course. Like when I was a therapist, because I did complex trauma therapy and like folks had just so many defenses that were present at any moment, part of my demeanor as a therapist is I was very calm, right? And I kind of kept it. So if I was excited, because sometimes my excitement could actually be overwhelming for somebody. If I see them doing some like really great parts work or like processing trauma, my excitement could actually run interference on this very like delicate emotional work that they're doing. So I had to really keep that zipped inside. But as a coach and as a teacher, you just get to be excited. And I find that when I'm often saying goodbye to folks, like when folks are leaving the community and they've been there for 6 months, the word that I always use, and I try to find synonyms, but I just can't, is I am so excited for you. I'm so excited for what things are going to look like in the next 6 months. Because we also know that this is like cumulative work, right? So like the good habits that you build add up over 3 months and 6 months and a year. And I feel like I'm just telling everybody that I'm excited all the time. But I am. Because like it is such powerful work. And once you see somebody get through whatever that barrier is for them, whether it's like an emotional barrier, like a story, some, childhood trauma around money or being small that they start to shift, or whether it's like learning an actual skill that they needed that now they have forever. Like it is so exciting. Yeah. The possibilities are endless.
It's the limitless. It's just the relief and the opening. Like I use the word liberating sometimes. Absolutely. It's like it just opens up so many more choices. And I think there's a lot of, I can't do this because I can't earn enough, or I can't do this because I can't. And when those things are figured out, it means you can make choices. If what you really want to do is X or Y, you've got the system in place that's going to now say, go do that. I got this over here. You go do that.
Totally.
And that's really exciting because they're going to just add so much more value to the world. And we need that right now. So it's, go do great things out there.
Exactly. Now that you've got this sorted out, all that energy can go towards all the amazing things you didn't have the bandwidth for before.
You're meant to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Diane, for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been really fun.
Yes. Thank you. My conversation with Diane just really brings to mind for me the richness of money. Like we could have talked for like 6 hours. There's so much to talk about, especially when you're somebody like Diane and I who want to dig in and get into money. There's just so many facets in terms of money in life and different relationships to money and like building the systems that support you. Money is just like a whole universe unto itself. And I'm really happy to have Diane on the team having those conversations with money skills for therapist students alongside me. So just really appreciative of Diane today. And I'm sure there's lots of pieces that got folks' wheels turning about money and life and what we want our relationships with money to look like. You can follow me on Instagram at Money Nuts and Bolts. And if you're enjoying the podcast, those podcast reviews on Apple Podcasts really are helpful. They show people that we are a real podcast that people really listen to and that they should want to listen to. So if you can take 3 minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, sharing about your favorite episode, what you appreciate about the podcast, that's really helpful for us. Thank you so much for listening today.